Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Built Heritage Committee meeting for April 9th, 2024. I'd like to call the members to order. This hybrid meeting is being facilitated through Zoom and is being held on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, the original custodians of the unceded land in which the city of Ottawa is located. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Since this committee meeting is being streamed live on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel, I'd like to remind participants to please keep your microphones, muted until I call upon you to speak. For those participating here in the committee room, please use the microphone in front of you and keep your computer muted. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raised their hand in Zoom. For panelists, the raise hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For those calling in, press *9 or raise your hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to this committee, those residents can still make written submissions and the public generally can still make written submissions to council. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact a committee coordinator. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. We did receive regrets from Councillor Kelly and Member Legault. Before we proceed, I'd like to ask the committee coordinator to do a roll call of all members.
Councillor Kelly, Member Dote?
Here.
Member Quinn?
Present, sorry.
Councillor Troster?
Here.
Member Madigan?
Present.
Councillor Leeper?
Good morning.
Member Legault, Vice Chair Plount?
Ici.
Chair King?
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you so much. The first item on the agenda is the confirmation of minutes of Monday, March 4th, 2024. Are the minutes noted on the agenda confirmed? Confirmed. Thank you. We also have on the agenda a response to an inquiry concerning heritage planning pre-application consultation, and I'd just like to thank staff for their hard work on that item. Now we'll move on to the substantive matters on the agenda for Planning, Real Estate, Economic Development Department. I'll proceed with a consent agenda. So the first item is an application to alter 315-321 Chapel Street, properties designated under Parts 4 and 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a presentation only if required. We did receive correspondence on this item from Heritage Ottawa. The only registered speakers are the applicant team and Heritage Ottawa. And I just wanted to check if Heritage Ottawa would need to speak if this item was adopted by the committee. Thank you. Thank you for those written submissions. So is there any desire amongst the committee to hold this item? Seeing none, is this item carried? Carried. Thank you. So this report will be submitted to the Planning and Housing Committee on April 24th for consideration. The next item is application to alter 253 Mackay Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, located in the New Edinburgh Heritage Conservation District. There is a presentation and we do have registered speakers, so we will hold that item. The next item is consideration of objection to notice of intention to designate Bible House at 315 Lisgar Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There are registered speakers for that item, so we will hold that item. The next item is designation of the Andrew W. Fleck Memorial, 195 George Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Presentation only if required. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa as well as the Lower Town Community Association. There is no residents or public members registered to speak other than Heritage Ottawa. I just wanted to ask once again, Heritage Ottawa, if you would need to speak if this item was passed by committee. Thank you so much. So does anybody on the committee want to hold this item? Seeing none, is this report carried? Carried. Thank you so much. This report will be submitted to council on April 17th for consideration. The next item is designation of 41 Rideau Street and 72 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I believe we do have a technical amendment on this item. We also have registered speakers, so we will hold that item. And then the next item is designation of 8 properties in Britannia Village under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There will be a motion to defer one of the recommendations. There are registered speakers, so that item will be held. The next item is Bill 23, implementation of changes to the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Register Removal Report number 3. There's a presentation only if required. As we know, the city staff is working on removing items so that we can be very strategic in terms of targeting designations. I've noted that there's only correspondence on this item from Heritage Ottawa. Heritage Ottawa is also listed to speak. Does Heritage Ottawa need to speak if this item is carried by committee? Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Is there any desire of the committee to hold this item? Seeing none, is the report carried? Carried. Thank you so much. This report will be submitted to council on April 17th for consideration. So now we return back to our substantive items. And I believe the first item is a presentation on an application to alter 235 Mackay Street.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. Oh, sorry. Perfect. Today I'll be giving a brief presentation on staff's recommendation to approve the application to alter 253 Mackay Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, located in the New Edinburgh Heritage Conservation District. Next slide. The residence at 253 Mackay Street is situated on Mackay Street across from Rideau Hall. Positioned on a narrow lot, the property includes a small side.
Sorry to stop you, but I
Sorry.
don't see the presentation yet on the Zoom link, and it's just come up.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
That's okay. Okay, I'll start from this slide. So the residence at 253 Mackay Street is situated on Mackay Street across from the Rideau Hall. Positioned on a narrow lot, the property includes a small side yard and shares a rear common wall with 180 Avon Lane. The building was a purpose-built testing facility known as the Tape Measurement Building, constructed in 1913 by the National Research Council. It was also used during the Second World War to test and repair instruments for the Royal Canadian Air Force, and later became a cosmic ray research facility. In 1959, the National Research Council added a one-story addition at the rear, today present at 180 Avon Lane. And in 1998, the building was declared surplus and converted to residential. During this time, a one-story solarium addition was constructed on 253 Mackay. This building is atypical in the context of New Edinburgh, as the neighborhood is predominantly residential. Next slide. So the proposed alterations include the construction of a one-story rooftop addition and a partially covered rooftop deck. The new massing will be set back from the front facade, have a low sloped shed roof, and be clad in charred wood. The rooftop deck will be concealed with a privacy screen extending along the west side, seen on the elevation at the bottom of the screen. And plantings will be strategically located on the rooftop and solarium to screen the addition, as seen on the other side elevation at the top of the screen. Next slide. So on this slide, you can see the front and rear elevations. On this drawing, you can see the height of the addition in comparison to the neighboring properties. And on the right of this slide is a sight line diagram taken from a person standing on Mackay Street. Next slide. Here you will see an existing and proposed render of the side elevation. In this visual, you can better see where the plantings will be strategically located on the solarium to screen the addition. Next slide. Here you will see an existing and proposed render of the front elevation from Mackay Street. Next slide. So the proposal has been evaluated against the guidelines in the New Edinburgh HCD plan, and Heritage staff have determined that the proposal is consistent with the objectives and intent of the plan. The HCD plan states that the height of any addition to an existing building shall not exceed the height of the existing roof line, and that additions shall normally be located in the rear yard. However, in the context of this site, there is no rear yard and only a small side yard, which creates an instance where a rear yard addition is not feasible. So staff looked at the unique history, typology, and character of the building in the HCD and evaluated the application for its overall compliance with the objectives, policies, and guidelines of the plan, and reviewed the proposal in consultation with the community and the applicant. Heritage staff are of the opinion that the addition is consistent with the streetscape as the massing and form of the building will be retained, and the building will remain the dominant presence in the streetscape. The addition is also set back from the roof edge and only slightly noticeable from the grade of the house, and designed in a contemporary style that is distinguishable from the original building. The property is also situated between two 2.5-story buildings, which mitigates the impact of the increased height of the addition on the streetscape. Next slide. Heritage Ottawa, the New Edinburgh Community Alliance, Councillor King, and neighbors within 30 meters of the property were notified of the application for alteration. Next slide. Heritage staff recommend that the application be approved for alteration, that minor design changes be delegated to the program manager, and that a heritage permit be issued with a 2-year expiry date. Please also note that this proposal will also require a minor variance to seek relief from the heritage overlay, which requires that additions to buildings be located in the rear yard and not exceed the height of the building. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We did receive correspondence on this item from Heritage Ottawa as well as the owner. And we do have a number of registered speakers, including the owner and the design team. And while they're being promoted, I see that Vice Chair Plant has raised her hand.
Yes, hi. I have a specific question that I've been too embarrassed to ask since I moved to Ottawa many years ago. Why is it Mackay and not McKay?
We might be able to get an update on that since somebody from NECA is here, and they might be willing to share some info on that.
I appreciate it very, very much. And now there's no time like the present. I appreciate it.
Okay. So I see that, and I think that's Mr. Martin. Excellent. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Chair King and members of committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present this morning. I'm not sure if the presentation itself will be available if we want to refer to particular elements. Firstly, I'd like to emphasize that this entire project has been a very close working with city staff to identify areas of concern and simulate a lot of views and model the building accurately in its context and in the proposed sense. So I want to thank city staff for their engagement on this file. In our experience, this client has been an absolute joy to work with. He is very committed to heritage and has already invested significant sums of money in masonry repointing. And anyone who walks inside sees how he has retained a lot of the industrial character of the former building in the interior. So as both in theory and in practice, this building is sort of a model of the kinds of projects that we like to be involved with. I want to stress the building itself has also demonstrated adaptive reuse over many years from its industrial and scientific origins to its current residential use. And I think it's also important to stress that heritage has a part to play in providing housing uses. As we know, we have housing pressures in the city, and for someone who's committed to the neighborhood to be able to stay and grow within their neighborhood is extremely important. There are a number of challenges with the existing building in terms of its envelope and insulation levels, and the proposed addition will help address some of these sustainability and energy need issues. So I think city staff have laid out the project very well. The real driver for this project is being able to provide a bit more space for an expanding family. I'm very, very comfortable that this project is a good fit within the neighborhood, and in no way does it detract from the identified heritage character. I think we've taken a very respectful role and approach to setting back the additions and keeping them compatible and subordinate, and still allowing the, if you like, primacy of the heritage streetscape to be maintained. There have been a number of suggestions by the New Edinburgh Heritage Conservation Group that this results in a desecration of a landmark, and I take great offense with this position. Heritage and heritage districts are not frozen in time. They must adapt to suit ongoing and new uses. And in our view, this is a very carefully calibrated, sensitive addition that maintains the heritage character and promotes its use for current and future generations. So I guess ask for committee's understanding that in terms of all of the conservation best practices, Parks Canada standards and guidelines, this project should be seen as exemplary and what we need to be doing more of to increase housing use while still maintaining heritage character in our districts. I think I'll leave it there for now. I know there are other speakers, and we'll invite any questions that members of committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions from committee? Member Madigan.
It's not a comment. I'd like to rise on a point of personal privilege.
Sure.
Okay, I have a statement that was prepared with the Integrity Commissioner. I'll read it off. I rise on a point of personal privilege to disclose that I previously worked for RMA, now RMA plus SH, involved in the application for 253 Mackay Street, which is before the built heritage today. I have consulted with the Integrity Commissioner, who advised I have no pecuniary or financial interests under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and therefore may participate in the discussion and vote on the matter. I wish to declare this relationship to provide transparency in the spirit of Section 1 of the Code of Conduct for the Built Heritage Committee. That said, I feel I should recuse myself from commenting and voting on this application at this meeting. Thank you.
We appreciate that disclosure, and it's always important to check with the Integrity Commissioner and the clerk in terms of potential pecuniary interests. So we appreciate that. Are there any other questions or comments from committee for this delegate? I did have one question, seeing no other questions from committee. I do note in your submission, you said that the community association, that you took offense to the idea of desecration of the structure. But it was my understanding that the community association was really emphasizing its concern about the proposed size of the second story addition and just seeking ways to mitigate those the size concerns. I was just wondering if you can comment as to the consideration that you might have given to the community whether it's adjacent residents or the community association's concerns around the proposed size of the second story addition.
Thank you, Councillor King. I guess a few points on that. The size of the addition relative to the existing building is very modest. So that's point number one. I think the renderings, especially from the street and then up and down the street, rather conclusively show the almost invisible nature of this addition, that it in no way looms over, overpowers, detracts from the heritage character. I think has already been pointed out, our building, even with its addition, is lower than the adjacent context. The setbacks and the view lines that were shown in that diagram are a very, very careful calibration to move the massing back from the street and reduce its impact. It's already been acknowledged this is somewhat of a anachronistic building within the district. It's not, doesn't fit the normal pattern of lot development, and there were obvious reasons why any form of addition can't be placed in the side or rear yard. And really what's driving this and the size, this is not a big addition. This is to provide another bedroom for a growing family. I mean, it's not a big addition. It's actually very modest.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Seeing no other questions, thank you for your delegation. And the next registered party is the New Edinburgh Community Alliance. Oh, sorry. Switch on. Oh. Before NECA makes comments, we do have John Rodney registered.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just need to try to get my presentation up. It was there and now my screen has been expanded so that I no longer see my presentation in front of me. I wonder if I could request that maybe the speaker from the New Edinburgh Community Association present while I get my presentation up, if that's acceptable to the chair and the committee.
We can do that.
Thank you so much. I can now see my presentation. It seems that it disappears when it is put onto full screen, so I'll put it up in front of me now and I will wait for my turn. Thank you very much.
We appreciate that. And we do have Gail from the New Edinburgh Community Alliance before us, and you have 5 minutes. You just need to press the button.
So it's my moment to speak?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Okay. Well, as you probably know already, the New Edinburgh Community Alliance has basically taken quite a different position on this project. My name is Gail McEachran, and I'm the chair of the Heritage and Development Committee of the New Edinburgh Community Alliance. And I've been involved with heritage issues in New Edinburgh for 25 years now. In February, I represented New Edinburgh on Heritage Day at City Hall, as I had done annually since 2013. The mayor traditionally makes a positive speech about the importance of protecting heritage and is appreciative of those participant groups who strive to uphold heritage conservation values in their respective communities. Ironically, 2 months later, I come before this committee to plead for a decision to reject a proposal to alter 253 Mackay Street, a one-of-a-kind landmark building located in New Edinburgh's historic district. New Edinburgh's Heritage Conservation Plan contains 2 key principles relating to the construction of additions onto existing buildings. 1, all additions to contributing buildings shall be subordinate to the original. In our view, this is clearly not subordinate at all to the original building. 2, the height of any addition to an existing building shall not exceed the height of the existing roof line. For added clarity, Section 60 of the city's Heritage Overlay Bylaw requires that the addition be confined to the rear yard and is inset from the sidewalls of the existing building by 0.06 meters. The purpose of these directives is to ensure that the proposed addition does not impose on the existing building and is discreetly hidden behind it. What we have here is the proposed construction of a large addition plus an extended outdoor deck, which will occupy more than 2/3 of the rooftop and substantially alter the appearance of this unique building. The Heritage staff have gone to great lengths to justify why its new structure will not have a detrimental effect on the building itself and the present character of the streetscape and the adjacent cultural landscape. The staff report maintains that the proposed addition and roof deck projection are set back from the facades so that the structures will not be visible from the street at the grade of the house, i.e. if you were standing, that is, on the near sidewalk facing the front entrance. The report acknowledges that they could be viewed from different vantage points and would be only slightly noticeable, and I'm quoting now from the staff report, and slightly noticeable from the street and will not obscure or detract from the heritage character of the existing building and the streetscape. The critical view which has been ignored is the one from the sidewalk and adjacent amenity space in front of 255 Mackay Street, from which the full length and dark bulk of the rooftop addition will be starkly visible. So why is this non-compliant project being brought to this committee? The staff's principal justification is that because there is no rear yard that can be built on, a rooftop addition is the only option. But it isn't the only option. The preferable option would be to respect the guidelines laid out in the New Ember's Heritage Conservation Plan and the city's bylaws, Heritage Overlay bylaws, and say no. I'm baffled and disheartened that the Heritage staff and those of us who volunteer to be the guardians of New Ember's Conservation District are sitting at opposite ends of the table. This is not a new phenomenon, but certainly an undesirable one. In 2018, representatives of 7 heritage conservation districts in Ottawa, plus Heritage Ottawa, contracted with Julian Smith, an architect and a scholar who is internationally recognized for his contribution to heritage conservation. The goal was to review the problems being experienced trying to protect Ottawa's heritage districts. Without exception, all participants agreed that the cultural heritage values of their districts were being routinely compromised and eroded due to the reluctance of city staff to respect the approved heritage plans for these districts. What we have here today is another example of this phenomenon. On behalf of the New Ember Community Alliance, I respectfully request that this committee turn down the proposal to prevent the desecration of a building which is architecturally unique. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Are there any questions from committee? Seeing none, thank you so much for your submission.
Welcome. Thank you.
And now we'll go back to John Rodney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me now?
We can. Please go ahead.
Again, I do see some photographs and the presentation in full screen in front of me. While I hope they can remain up on the screen, I wonder if your technicians could kindly minimize that so I'm able to access my presentation that I will read out to you, if that's acceptable to you and the committee. Thank you.
So,
Chair, if I may, the presenter will need to exit full screen view on his end.
Exit full screen view on my end. Okay, I'll try to do that then. I apologize for that. So if you just bear with me one moment, I'll try to do that. But in the interest of time, I will start my presentation if that's acceptable to the committee.
yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, councilors, and members of the Built Heritage Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the application that is being considered today during today's Built Heritage Committee meeting. I am the owner of the property located at 249-251 Mackay Street in the New Edinburgh Heritage Conservation District, or HCD, and which is immediately adjacent to the property located at 253 Mackay Street that is the subject of the current application. I have reviewed the subject application via the City of Ottawa's Development Application Search tool, and after reviewing the subject application, I believe that the proposed alterations as presented will be highly detrimental not only to my property, but also to the HCD, and as a result, I wish to register my strong opposition. Question. In this regard, I understand from materials submitted by the current application that the proposed one-story rooftop addition to 253 Mackay Street does not meet the Heritage Overlay Section 60 of the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw. And this is indeed confirmed at page 4 of the report to the Built Heritage Committee submitted on March 26, 2024 by Mr. Court Curry of the City of Ottawa. As also confirmed at pages 3 and 4 of the report, the HCD was designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act in 2001 for its cultural heritage value within the City of Ottawa. And the HCD features a high level of architectural integrity with a diverse mix of architectural styles and types. In this regard, I note that the HCD is designated as Heritage Conservation District, which clearly confirms that its mandate is to conserve the existing built heritage character of the area of New Edinburgh that it covers, and the creation of the HCD in 2001 was undertaken for a purpose that was considered by the city to be important at that time, at least. Mr. Chair, councillors, and members of the Built Heritage Committee, I submit that in your positions as members of the committee, you play a critical role as trustees for all residents of the City of Ottawa, including those in the HCD, in ensuring that the existing built heritage character in the City of Ottawa is conserved. And although in the future you may no longer serve as members of the committee, nonetheless, the decisions that you make during your current mandate as members of the committee will have a lasting impact upon the existing built heritage character of the City of Ottawa and the HCD in particular. With respect to the current application for the one-story rooftop addition to 253 Mackay Street, the committee is being asked to approve a structure backed by the City of Ottawa's own admission, does not comply with the Heritage Overlay Section 60 of its own zoning bylaw, which was created prima facie by the City of Ottawa for a purpose, namely, and as stated in the Heritage Overlay Section 60, quote, in order to encourage the retention of existing heritage buildings by offering zoning incentives to reuse buildings and to limit the size and location of additions to preserve the heritage character of the original building, end of quote. I strongly believe that the very large mass of the proposed addition to 253 Mackay Street would result in a substantial intrusion on the surrounding landscape of New Edinburgh and the HCD in a location that faces directly towards the grounds of Rideau Hall, which is as the official residence of both Canada's Governor General and Prime Minister, and which is therefore the subject of ongoing significant pedestrian and motor vehicle traffic by visitors both from within Canada and abroad traveling along Mackay Street between Dufferin Road and Sussex Drive. With respect specifically to the impact of the proposed addition on the property that I own at 251 Mackay Street, I submit that the rooftop proposed addition to 253 Mackay Street would have an immediate and highly detrimental impact upon both the privacy and the direct natural light of the property that I own at 251 Mackay Street. As far as privacy is concerned, as demonstrated in Exhibit DD 2.3 West elevations proposed, the proposed addition includes 5 windows facing west, which will overlook directly the rear of my property at 251 Mackay Street, including both the existing ground floor and second floor decks on each unit, and consequently represent a direct intrusion onto the privacy of both units of my property. However, in both the City of Ottawa report at page 4 and in Exhibits DD 1.2 and DD 2.2, the privacy of the applicant are clearly indicated as key elements in the application and include a privacy screen, which is called Legend Item 10 in Exhibit DD 2.2, and quote, potential potted ornamental tree, which is a spelling mistake. I think that means trees, for privacy and existing roof. As a result, although the above mentioned items clearly confirm that the privacy of the applicant is a key consideration for the applicant, it is evident that the privacy of the neighboring property is of no concern for the applicant. As far as direct natural light is concerned, as clearly demonstrated in photograph number 2 facing east and photograph number 3 facing west that I've submitted to the committee for consideration, the proposed addition will completely block all direct morning sunlight rising in the east from the rear of my property at 251 Mackay Street. as confirmed in exhibits DD 2.1 and DD 4.2 in the package 253 Mackay Street rooftop addition heritage permit, which was attached to the application. The height of the addition is 3.42 meters or 11.2202 feet, which is approximately 1 meter higher than the height of the structure at 180 Avon Lane that is shown at the right side of photo 1.
So
In addition to
John, your time has expired, but I'll give you a minute just to wrap up.
Thank you. Those two. Okay. There are also two existing, as far as light is concerned, two existing dormer windows on the second floor of my property at 251 Mackay Street. Those are exhibit in the site survey, as well as exhibits 5.2, 5.1, and ED 2.3, as well as the ground floor window shown in photo 2 that is located below the two dormer windows. They will also be completely blocked by the proposed addition and the proposed privacy screen. However, although the proposed addition and privacy screen will all block all direct morning sunlight to my property at 249, 251 Mackay Street, exhibit DD 2.2 clearly indicates the proposed addition will include 5 windows facing east, all of which are expansive windows that will be exposed to unimpeded direct morning sunlight. As a result, although the above mentioned items clearly confirm that access to direct sunlight is a key consideration for the applicant, it is evident that access to direct sunlight from my neighboring property is of no concern for the applicant. I also confirm that although the report indicates that the plans were submitted on February 21, 2024 and posted on the city's development application, I received a notice from the city dated 25th of March, 2024, i.e. more than 1 month later, which represent the first occasion that I was notified of the heritage application and was therefore informed that the application material could be viewed on the City of Ottawa's development application search tool. And although as indicated, I'm the owner, I was never consulted on the proposed application, and nor was any documentation provided to me either by the applicant or by the city prior to the 25th of March. I also note that, as had been indicated by the previous speaker from NECA, the
John,
city has indicated that
I'll have to stop you there because you have definitely exceeded the Cullen rule, the 5-minute rule, but we appreciate your comments. I will ask members of committee whether they have any specific questions for you.
Thank you.
And I don't see any hands raised, so thank you so much for that. And we always ask as well residents and delegates to submit their concerns also in writing so that the full information can go on the record. So we appreciate your delegation. The next delegate is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa.
Heritage Ottawa guy, we gotta make notes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Heritage Ottawa supports the staff recommendations and conditions for approval of the addition to this unique and important property within the New Edinburgh Heritage Conservation District. This is a good example of the adaptive reuse of an institutional building in what is essentially a residential neighborhood. Although the addition does not technically meet the HCD guidelines for additions, the fact that there is no backyard makes it a permissible exception given the proposed use and preservation of the building. For this reason, we feel that it meets the intent of the guidelines. The design of the addition is appropriate for the architecture of the existing building and does not attempt to mimic the second stories of adjacent residential properties. We do, however, support the NECA concern about the proposed size of the second-story addition and urge staff to work with the proponent to possibly mitigate this concern. Nevertheless, we support the application for the relief of the heritage overlay, as this action simply brings the building up to 2 stories, which, although a bit higher, is typical for the HCD. The setback and/or reduction in the size of the second-story addition will mitigate any major intrusions on the streetscape. Given the unique history, architectural design, and former use of this structure, it might also be considered as a candidate for a Part 4 designation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your delegation. Are there any questions? And I see a question from Councillor Lieber.
Yeah, and I am just curious, would you support this alteration if it were a Part 4 designated building?
We would consider that, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your delegation. We now move to questions to staff. And I see that Member Quinn has raised her hand.
Thank you, Chair. If staff just wouldn't mind showing the renderings again from the streetscape, just so that we can see again the impact of the height of the addition, not just from sort of directly across the street, but the angled, which the angled view that NECA had specifically referenced.
And staff is just working on pulling that up.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. And so right now there is an existing fence, am I correct, separating those two properties?
That is correct. Maybe going back a couple more slides. One more, maybe? Yeah, that one?
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay. All right, that's more what I was looking for. And this will show the one on the left is the existing, the one on the right is with the addition. Okay, thank you. I guess my question, a follow-up is again, just to sort of ask staff to explain the reasoning behind the exception in this case to the guidelines.
Yeah, through your chair. So as I mentioned in my presentation, the HCD plan does state that an existing building shall not exceed the height of the existing roof line, and that addition shall not normally be located in the rear yard. But this is a unique context and situation because there is no rear yard. And then there is a very small side yard. So we believe that the addition on the roof is appropriate. So that's why we are making that recommendation here.
Okay, thank you. I will say that I am going to be supporting the staff recommendation. I actually think this is, a very good project, and I think the owner has definitely shown his commitment to conservation in the treatment of the building and the care with which he has approached this. Perhaps in the effort to deal with his own privacy, some communication with the neighbor would be really useful. But from my perspective and my understanding of my role, it's really the public realm perspective on this property that is of more concern or more importance from this committee's perspective. So with that in mind, I will be supporting the staff recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Quinn. Are there any other questions from committee? Seeing none, I do have a few questions, and I was just wondering if staff could speak to in the context of this application before us, the balance between conservation and adaptive reuse.
Yeah, so I think the applicant team actually did a good job of explaining this, and that the owner has been making efforts to conserve this property. They have done a lot of repointing work. They have kept the building looking institutional while reusing the building for residential use. So I think it's a really great project that balances adaptive reuse and conservation. And because this particular owner is growing and expanding their property, this is a good example of expanding in place.
And my last question really deals with adjacent residents and the right to privacy. Is there a right to privacy or to an unobstructed view for residents that might be impacted by the property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is nothing in the Ontario Heritage Act or the Planning Act that would require a right to privacy.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate staff's response. I know that the city's heritage staff is committed to working with property developers to encourage adaptive reuse to rejuvenate historic structures for new use by repurposing them into more functional spaces. We know that's important as we see scenarios where we have neglected properties throughout the city, heritage properties that in a sense need love and investment and support. So I will be supporting this item. Seeing that there are no other questions to staff, is the report carried? Carried. Thank you so much. And we note that Member Madigan did step away from the table. This report will be submitted to council on April 17th for consideration. The next item before us is consideration of objection to notice of intention to designate Bible House at 315 Lisgar Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a presentation and we do have registered speakers.
Hi again. I will be giving a brief presentation on staff's recommendation to not withdraw the notice of intention to designate the Bible House at 315 Lisgar Street and to proceed with the designation process under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide. So this property is familiar probably to most members of BHC. However, just as a refresher, 315 Lisgar Street, also known as the Bible House, is a two-story brick commercial building constructed in 1922, located between Bank and O'Connor Street in Ottawa's Centertown neighborhood. Next slide, please. I'm now going to quickly go over the events that have led to this report being in front of us today. Heritage staff evaluated the property and determined that it met 5 of the 9 criteria set out in Regulation 0906. On October 12th, 2023, staff made initial contact with the property owner to inform them of the intent to designate. On January 16th of this year, staff brought forward a designation report to BHC. On January 26th, the designation was approved at council and a NOID was issued. On February 24th, a notice of objection from the owner was received. And today we are at the consideration of the objection and council must make a decision by May 25th. Next slide, please. So now before we go over the details of this objection, staff would like to provide an overview of the designation process under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as objection reports may become more common as we designate more properties. On the screen is an abbreviated graphic illustrating the designation process under Part 4. So there's a lot of detail on the screen, but we will break it down. Under the current Ontario Heritage Act, there are 2 opportunities to challenge a designation. Today, we are working with the first opportunity referred to in the Heritage Act as an objection. Next slide. After a notice of intention to designate is issued, there is a 30-day period for any person to submit an objection to the notice. The objection submission must set out all reasons for the objection and any new information in writing. An objection essentially brings the designation back in front of council for a second review. So in this case, after the notice of intention to designate the Bible house was issued, the city received a notice of objection from the property owner within that 30-day period, bringing the item back to Built Heritage Committee and Council. Next slide, please. This second review is the step in the process we are at today. The Act requires that Council consider the objection and decide from two options. 1, to proceed with the designation, or 2, to withdraw the designation. This stage is highlighted on the screen. Council has 90 days following the conclusion of the objection period to decide on the objection, bringing us to a statutory end date for this application of May 25th, 2024. BHC's role today is to pick between the two options and recommend that Council either withdraw the notice of intention to designate or proceed with the notice of intention to designate as per staff's recommendation today. So option 1, if Council decides to withdraw the notice, the designation is effectively canceled and will not proceed further. The city is also required to issue a notice of withdrawal similar to the original notice of intention to designate. Option 2, if Council decides to proceed, the process continues normally. It is important to note that if Council proceeds with the designation, the approval of a designation bylaw is open to appeals to the Ontario Lands Tribunal. This is the second opportunity to challenge. Next slide, please. So this slide just recaps the two options to either proceed or withdraw. Next slide. So now we will address the objection in question. The objection was submitted by the property owner and outlines one main reason for their objection to the NOID, which is the potential impact designation will have on property value. Financial implications and impacts on property value are not a consideration when evaluating a property for designation under Ontario Regulation 906, and a property may be designated if it meets 2 or more of the 9 criteria. While financial impacts of designation are not a consideration in evaluating a property for designation, the City of Ottawa offers a heritage grant program for building restoration. A property of this size would qualify for a matching grant of up to $25,000 every 2 years, and a newly designated property is the highest priority for funding as per the program guidelines. Also, should the property be redeveloped in the future, the proposal may be eligible for the city's Heritage Community Improvement Plan, which offers up to $500,000 in the form of a tax increment equivalent grant towards restoration of heritage buildings as part of larger developments. Next slide, please. Staff's overview of the objection is set out in the report brought forward to BHC today. The notice of objection does not present any arguments related to the city's evaluation of the cultural heritage value of the property. Thus, the department maintains the position that designation is recommended. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa on this item, and we do have registered speakers. The first speaker registered is George St. Clair from the Church of the Messiah, and I think that he is
am I on?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see you, and you have 5 minutes before the committee.
Thank you very much for allowing us. I'm the only one speaking on this, by the way, to my knowledge. Thank you for having me and allowing me to speak. Just some background. We are a small that originally purchased the property at 315 Liz Cruz Street with the hopes of one day selling it in order to buy another building that would meet the needs of our congregation. In some ways, we viewed it as a starter home. Our church council is completely and utterly made up of volunteers, nobody who has background in heritage status or dealing with the city on matters like this. We realize that there's probably not much we can do about the heritage status of the building, but we would like to ask for a 6-month delay in the process. We have had some conversations with an architectural heritage architect. We would like to consult some other professionals in this field to understand exactly what it means and how we could work to have the building either sold in a way that's in keeping with the heritage status, or just we can understand the development processes involved in being able to move to the next level of the congregation's property owning life. And so we've asked for a 6-month extension so we can consult the relevant professionals to understand the resale value, not necessarily to a developer who would make it bigger, but especially if it's to a smaller owner who, like us, might not have a large range of experience with heritage buildings and how to deal with it, but are concerned a little bit with some of the wording around maintaining the signed Bible house or some other things like that. And so we'd like to be able to come back with some proposals or clarifications about what the designation means for the future use of the property. Thank you. I don't need the whole 5 minutes.
Thank you for your comments. They're much appreciated. Are there any questions to the delegation? And I see that Councillor Troster has a question.
Hi, George. I'm Ariel Troster. I'm the counselor for the ward. So I just wanted to say hello and thank you for being here.
Hello.
I understand your concern when it comes to this file. So are you intending to redevelop the site, or you were just looking to sell it?
Well, I mean, we're not going to sell unless we have another property. But from day one, we haven't necessarily viewed it as wanting to sell it to a developer to put up 8 stories of condos or anything like that. We also see that there might be other types of owners who would like to keep it sort of the same size, maybe filling in the driveway or something like that. And we would just like to be able to understand it was Barry, the architect's name is Barry, that we've had some talks with initially, and he suggested that we spend some money to do some research to come back just with some things. I don't know, once again, I'm not a professional in this. I'm just a duffer. So we're not thinking of developing it per se, although we would like to know if down the road, because we continue to rent a building for Sunday mornings, maybe we would want to do some work on it to create make it more flexible for our use throughout the week. And we'd like to have a bit of a sense about what's allowed or not allowed. So we'd like a 6-month delay to consult with professionals on the issue.
Okay,
at the end of 6 months, we're not going to come back and disagree with to try to fight the designation, by the way.
Okay, but is the chief concern in your letter is related to the potential impact of the heritage designation on property value? Is that still correct?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's still correct. Yes.
Okay. And are you aware that heritage staff and planning staff are not able to consider impact to property value as part of their decision?
Yeah, that's why I'm here to ask for a 6-month extension so we can have a better understanding of whether we want to develop it ourselves or whether we want to sell it to somebody and what's exactly involved with it. We'd like to have
okay, well, how would the delay change your potential plans? Like, what would 6 months give you, in your opinion?
Well, we're willing to spend some money to hire a heritage architect to help us understand a little bit better about what's involved in redeveloping the property if we want to sell it. We're under the impression that bringing something back for council to approve, if it's accepted, can make it easier down the road when we want to sell the building.
Okay. Are you also aware of the fact that heritage staff is very happy to work with the owners of a designated property on any redevelopment projects? I mean, there's lots of examples, including the former Metropolitan Bible Church that was incorporated into the condo buildings there. And in fact, it's a very valuable property. It was not a barrier to redevelopment. Are you aware of those examples?
Yes, I'm aware of 2 things. First of all, once again, none of us, this is the first time there's nobody in our congregation who's ever had to appear before anything like this before.
Okay,
so
that's fair.
In a sense, I don't really appreciate being talked to as if I'm an architect doing this all of the time. We're trying to figure things out and move forward in a win-win, good faith manner with you, with council and city. I am aware that when we've looked at different buildings to buy, the first thing that our real estate agent has said is that because of its heritage status, the building's going to be cheaper than it would be otherwise. And we've looked at a variety of different properties. So we would just like to understand that. We would like to try to maybe come forward with some proposals to minimize that. We're not going to fight the designation at the end of the day, but we're rookies at this, and rookies without an architect degrees.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for coming. And I also want to say, you know, I've seen people lined up to eat free food that you've been giving out to the community, or you had a barbecue in the summer, or maybe it was in the fall. So thank you so much for the
Thursday night.
outreach. Yeah,
Thursday
thank
night.
you.
We feed the poor on Thursday nights.
Well, thank you. We really do appreciate that. I hope you understand that I don't have a tool at my disposal to offer you a 6-month delay. There's just really nothing in the legislation that allows us to do that. But I hope you know the Heritage staff is they're very great, very, very good to work with, and I'm sure they can address your concerns as you move forward. So thank you for appearing today. I wish I had better news, but I don't see anything in the regulations that would allow us to grant you a delay. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Councillor Troster. Are there any other questions for this delegation? Seeing none, thank you, George, for your submission. Much appreciated. And the last registered speaker on this item is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa. Thank you so much, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heritage Ottawa reiterates its support for the designation of this property under the Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have recently seen an ever-increasing number of heritage buildings being incorporated as part of new intensified additions. Ottawa has many heritage architects and developers with experience in adaptive reuse of similar properties that could provide advice to the owners of the property. We suggest that staff encourage the owner to consider the assistance offered by the Heritage Grant Program for building restoration and the Heritage Community Improvement Plan Program, which are available to heritage property owners to help alleviate the cost of preserving and developing designated heritage properties. For this reason, we do not support the opposition of the owners. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your delegation. Are there any questions for Mr. Fleming? Oh, I see Councillor Leeper has a question.
Thanks, Chair. David, sorry, I'm just taking a look at the building and the statement of its heritage character attributes. If the church were to come down the road a year from now, 2 years from now, with a redevelopment proposal that was acceptable to staff, that saw substantial demolition of most of it but the front facade, how much of an issue would that be for Heritage Ottawa?
Well, it would depend on the effect that it would have on the heritage attributes of the building as approved. And there's a lot of give and take involved in this. You know, it's where we're not, these things aren't etched in stone. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've seen in some of the other agenda items is that there has to be trade-off. And just because you have a heritage overlay, as we had in the New Edinburgh one, doesn't mean that the heritage overlay is etched in stone. That there has to be negotiations there. And I think that we've been reasonably successful in the city of Ottawa to have a balance between heritage preservation and intensification. And given the importance of intensification in the new official plan, and given the restrictions on preservation, I think it's very important that community organizations who support their heritage get involved in a proactive manner with the city to try and look forward so that we can deal with these items.
Yeah, and I do appreciate actually your pragmatic approach with respect to the last application, which you know, obviously had significant support around this table as well. I guess I'm just wondering whether or not Reverend Sinclair probably is just struggling with an understanding as something that staff may want to chat with him about what the what the heritage designation means, and then what the process is for doing something down the road, and what that permit process is, and how staff will evaluate changes, and how the community will evaluate changes. Like you say, it's not etched in stone once the designation is there. And when I read the list of heritage character attributes, I think there's probably some significant room for alteration down the road. But I absolutely agree that it's important to protect the building today, especially given the deadlines that we're facing. David, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm using out loud. Thank you.
Could I just add one more thing? I think it's encouraging that the owner has indicated that he wants to talk to a restoration architect about what the options are out there. And whether that's a reason to extend your decision or not, I don't want to comment on that. But the fact that he recognizes that there is some possibility that that they could get some useful information from doing that, I think is a very positive thing.
Yeah, it's in the meet, since there's no particular there's no architecture on paper right now for a potential future redevelopment. So it's important for us to protect all of those heritage character attributes today. But there is always the possibility for developers and owners to seek changes to those in a future redevelopment. So I would urge him to continue working with architects and also to get up to speed with what that process is. It can be very confusing for an outsider. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your delegation. I don't see any other hands raised, so we appreciate those comments. Are there any questions to staff? And I believe Councillor Troster has a question for staff.
Thank you so much. Can staff clarify, just to be abundantly clear, any future development would also be able to seek a heritage permit or revisions to the heritage permit if they want to make changes. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, any future development of this property, if it were designated under the Heritage Act, would seek a heritage permit, which could consider any alterations to the property that may or may not impact the attributes that have been listed. So it doesn't freeze the property in time, as you've seen through applications at this committee.
So truly a designation just means that the owner would have to work with you for any sort of redevelopment.
Yes, there's an additional process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions for staff? Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify, I think you did bring this up in your presentation. By having the designation, there is actually immediate positive impact for the property, for the owner to have access to funds for maintenance. And as I understand it, all owners are responsible to pay for maintenance of buildings anyway and keep them up. So it is required maintenance on a building. By having this designation, the owner has access to matching funds to up to a certain maximum amount, including also future developers, if, for example, they were to develop the property.
Through you, Chair, that is correct. They could access the Heritage Grant Program for Building Restoration for a matching grant of up to $25,000, and newly designated properties are a priority of this program. So yes, it would have an immediate effect, and they could also access the Community Improvement Program.
Thank you for clarification.
Thank you so much for those questions. Are there any other questions to staff? Seeing none, I just wanted to give a brief comment. I think it is important to acknowledge that what we do here at this committee is prescribed and under the regulations, as we had heard as well from Councillor Troster and from staff. Property value and the financial implications are not a consideration for objection. So we understand that, but I think what we also heard in terms of the deliberation and debate on this item is that staff have indicated to council that they will work in good faith with any cooperative developer demonstrating a genuine interest in pursuing the successful renovation of historic structures to advance urban regeneration. And so it's important, no matter what the designation status, to work with staff who are open to working to ensure the best for the property and the best outcome for the community. So on that note, is the report carried? Carried. Thank you. This report will be submitted to council on April 17th for consideration. The next item before us is designation of 41 Rideau Street and 73 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And I do believe that we have a technical amendment to this item that will be moved by Vice Chair Plante. And we're just awaiting that item to be brought into the Zoom presentation.
Chair, I have it in front of me. If you want me just to read it, it's up to you.
And it's just popped up. So yes, please go ahead, Vice Chair.
Great. Whereas the report recommends 1 and 2 refer to the incorrect document numbers as they relate to the statement of cultural heritage value for 41 and 73 Rideau Street. And whereas in document 4, the statement of cultural heritage value for 41 Rideau Street inaccurately lists large display windows on the 2nd and 3rd floors. Therefore, be it resolved that the recommendation 1 be amended to list the statement of cultural heritage value for 41 Rideau as document 4, and therefore be it further resolved that recommendation 2 be amended to list the statement of cultural heritage value for 73 Rideau as document 5, and therefore be it further resolved that the description of heritage attributes subsection of document 4 be amended to correctly state large display windows on 1st and 2nd floors. Merci beaucoup.
Appreciate that. And now we go to staff for a presentation.
Good morning, Chair King, Vice Chair Plante, and Built Heritage Committee members. Today I'm presenting on Heritage staff's recommendation to designate 41 and 73 Rideau Street as individual designations under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I'm going to start with 41 Rideau Street. Next slide, please. The building at 41 Rideau Street is a mixed-use 8-story brick-clad building constructed in 1913. The property is located on the northeast corner of the intersection of Rideau Street and Sussex Drive in Ward 12. The property can be seen outlined in red on the aerial image on this slide. The building is named the Plaza Building to reflect its proximity to the Plaza Bridge and Confederation Square. Next slide, please. The Plaza Building at 41 Rideau Street has design value as an early example of a Chicago-style steel frame skyscraper in Ottawa. The Chicago style is used to refer to the innovative commercial buildings and early skyscrapers that were built in large cities in the 1890s and 1930s. The building has associative value as it is representative of the work of W.E. Noffke, one of Ottawa's most significant architects. Over the first half of the 20th century, Noffke designed over 200 domestic, commercial, institutional, and religious buildings throughout Ottawa. The Plaza Building represents Noffke's pre-war experimentation with technically progressive construction methods. Robert and Russell Blackburn, known professionally as the Blackburn brothers, were well-established developers and entrepreneurs in Ottawa from the early to mid-20th century. The Blackburn brothers commissioned Noffke to design the building at 41 Rideau Street as an investment property, which opened in 1914 as a mixed-use building. The McCarker Wanlifts Limited Store occupied the first 2 stories of the building between 1914 and 1945, during which the store was the largest men's clothing store in Ottawa. Next slide, please. The building at 41 Rideau Street is physically and historically linked to its surrounding properties at the iconic intersection of Rideau Street and Sussex Drive, including the Chateau Laurier, the former Union Station, the Plaza Bridge, Confederation Square, which were all developed at approximately the same time and as a result of early 20th century improvement efforts in Ottawa. The Plaza Building marks a transition between Ottawa's parliamentary precinct and the commercial area of the Byward Market. The building is important in maintaining and supporting both the national significance of Wellington Street and of Rideau Street's commercial character. Next slide, please. The full list of heritage attributes is attached in the staff report. However, the key exterior attributes that contribute to the cultural heritage value of the Plaza Building as an early example of a steel frame skyscraper in the Chicago style include its 8-story massing, symmetrical facades facing Rideau Street and Sussex Drive, a string course with diamond inserts below the top story windows, stucco panels with a diamond brick motif between the windows on the top story, repeating window bays with vertically oriented rectangular window openings, a decorative cornice between the second and third floors, brick pilasters with decorative capitals between the windows on the second story, and large display windows on the first and second floors. Next slide, please. Moving on to the next property, I will now present on Heritage staff's recommendation to designate 73 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. The building at 73 Rideau Street is a stone-clad unified building comprised of two sections, a 6-story section, which was originally the Stewart Building at 59 to 61 Rideau Street, and a 5-story section, which was developed as the Freeman's Department Store. Constructed in phases between 1926 and 1929, the building is located on the north side of Rideau Street between Sussex Drive and Williams Street. The building is a couple doors up and on the same block as 41 Rideau Street. 73 Rideau can be seen outlined in red on the aerial image on this slide. Next slide, please. The building at 73 Rideau Street has design value as a unique example of Beaux-Arts architectural style used in a department store in Ottawa. The Beaux-Arts architectural style was popular in Canada during the first 2 decades of the 20th century. The building was designed by John A. Ewart, a well-known architect in Ottawa. The building is the only department store Ewart designed. The building at 73 Rideau Street is directly associated with the A.J. Freeman Department Store and the Freeman family. The A.J. Freeman Department Store, known as Freeman's, was a well-known retail institution in Ottawa and one of the earliest businesses on Rideau Street. They operated out of this location from 1902 until 1971. In 1924, Freeman's acquired the 6-story section, formerly called the Stewart Building, and in 1926, the whole site was renovated to integrate both buildings into a cohesive facade. Throughout the store's 71-year history, the Freeman Department Store became the largest and most iconic department store in Ottawa. The Freeman family established the Freeman's Department Store and were known for the innovative business strategies, which led to the success, growth, and expansion of the store. The Freeman family were also integral members of the Jewish community in Ottawa, Canada, and internationally. Next slide, please. The building at 73 Rideau Street has contextual value as it is important in supporting and maintaining the commercial character of Rideau Street, which has served as a commercial main street in Ottawa since the 19th century. As a 20th century department store on a historic commercial main street, the building is historically and functionally linked to its surroundings. The building continues to function as a department store and has been occupied by the Hudson's Bay Company since the 1970s. Next slide, please. The full list of heritage attributes is attached in the staff report. However, the key exterior attributes that contribute to the cultural heritage value of 73 Rideau Street as a unique example of a department store in the Beaux-Arts style include its stone cladding, repetitive rectangular window openings, and first-story display windows. On the 5-story massing, heritage attributes include a string course between the 3rd and 4th stories, decorative medallions in the stepped parapet, and repetitive pilasters with carved capitals. On the 6-story massing, heritage attributes include arched windows and a dentilled cornice with decorative brackets. To conclude, both 41 and 73 Rideau Street are strong candidates for individual designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Each property meets 5 of 9 criteria for designation. This concludes this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that detailed presentation. Much appreciated. We did receive correspondence from the Lower Town Community Association as well as Heritage Ottawa, and we do have 2 registered speakers. The first registered speaker is Vanda Gillingham. And I believe she's being promoted. Oh. We unfortunately don't have Vanda online, so as we wait, we do have David Fleming registered as a speaker on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
find it here. Heritage Ottawa supports the staff recommendations as outlined in the statements of cultural heritage value for these buildings. These retail and commercial properties located on one of Ottawa's historic main streets contributed and continues to contribute to the vibrant retail and commercial life of Ottawa in the 20th and 21st centuries. They are also good examples of the work of two of Ottawa's most prominent architects, Werner Ernst Noffke and John Albert Ewart. The protection afforded under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act will also help preserve the heritage attributes of this important streetscape. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I see that Vice Chair Plante has her hand raised.
Yeah, just a very quick comment. Thank you, everybody who researched and looked into this wonderful location. It really is the gateway to Ward 12, is not only just this intersection, but the Rideau Center. So I just wanted to just give my flowers to everybody involved. I think it's wonderful. Merci beaucoup.
We appreciate that. And I don't see any other hands raised to ask you any questions. So thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
I don't believe that Ms. Gillingham has joined us. So we can move directly to questions of staff. If the committee has any questions, now would be the time. And I don't, Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify for my own benefit, the designation statement sort of speaks to the building as it is now. What is done with respect to particular features such as the upper cornice that were removed in the past, but were a significant feature of the building?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. It's correct. The cornice at the top of the building has been previously removed. And so you'll notice that the statement doesn't list or doesn't speak to that former cornice, the detailed cornice. But I think through this designation, we could work with the owner if there was interest in restoring that cornice at a future time or a later date. And I think that's one of the benefits of this designation.
Thank you. I just know for looking at some other building heritage charter statements, sometimes they will have a statement that, the building is missing these features, which are significant character elements, and it's encouraged to, in the future, if possible, bring them back. So maybe if that's something that's part of the standard within the city, I don't know, but thank you for your explanation.
Thank you so much for those questions. And I don't see any other hands raised. So I just wanted to really briefly thank staff and echo the comments of Vice Chair Plante. I can appreciate the amount of work that was undertaken on this report. It was lengthy and very detailed, but I think it was a great exercise detailing not just the history of the built character of that building, but also the cultural history behind that building. So really appreciative to have this designation before us. Frankly, one of the most iconic, distinctive buildings in the city before us. So it's a great honor to ask the committee, is the report carried as amended? Carried. Thank you so much. This report will be submitted to council on April 17th. Oh, and the motion, of course, is carried as amended. So the report will be submitted to council on April 17th for consideration. The next item before us is designation of 8 properties in Britannia Village under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And there is a motion to defer recommendation 2 that I will ask Vice Chair Plante to introduce. Oh, it's a removal, sorry. So please go ahead, Vice Chair Plante.
Merci beaucoup. Are you bringing it up on screen or do you want me to read?
Yes, and I think staff is bringing it up right now.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So whereas staff attempted to contact the property owner by letter on February 3rd, 2024 and March 5th, 2024, and whereas the property owner reached out to staff on April 7th, 24 resulting in meeting on April 8th, 2024. And whereas further consideration have been presented that will require additional time and discussion on designation of 195 Brantford Street and Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Therefore, be it resolved that Built Heritage Committee approve the removal of report recommendation 2 from ACS 2024 PRE RHU 0040. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much for introducing that motion, and we have a presentation from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before staff start, I just wanted to introduce the committee to Kirsty Walker, who is here on the left. She's one of our Built Heritage Research Coordinators, along with Lauren Luchensky, who you just heard presentation for Rideau Street on. Just want to give them a little shout out. There are busy professional historians working in the background and providing you guys with all that great historical research that you're seeing in the reports every month. So I'm going to pass it over to Kirsty to give the presentation, and Ashley is here as well as the heritage planner on the file. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and Built Heritage Committee members. Today I'm presenting on staff's recommendation for the designation of the following 8 properties under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, which includes 119 and 205 Bradford Street, 73 Britannia Road, 95 Kirby Road, 2764 and 2775 Rowett Street, and 2777 Castle Street. Next slide, please. These 8 properties are located in Ottawa's western suburb of Britannia in the historic Britannia Village. As illustrated by this aerial map, Britannia Village is defined by its natural boundaries of Britannia Bay, the Ottawa River, Mud Lake, and the Trans-Canada Trail, formerly known as the Canadian Pacific Railway. Next slide, please. All 8 buildings proposed for designation have contextual value as they are important to maintaining Britannia's early cottage character. These properties share several characteristics which illustrate a late 19th and early 20th century cottage community. This includes vernacular cottage architectural features, the retention of original forms, the use and retention of local natural materials, informal landscaping and mature trees, along with irregular and deep setbacks. These features demonstrate Britannia's original wooded landscape, the casual and gradual growth from a small group of seasonal cottages to a flourishing summer resort. Next slide, please. The Algonquin have called the Ottawa River home since time immemorial, and archaeological evidence demonstrates their presence specifically on the Britannia Peninsula. The first European settlers were in the area were farmers who came after the completion of Richmond Road in 1818. Then in the mid-1820s to the early 1870s, Britannia was a small industrial suburb of mill workers. In 1873, Britannia was surveyed with the intent to sell lots as cottage properties. Over the next 2 decades, Britannia was a mix of camps, seasonal cottages, and a few year-round residences. By the late 1890s, it was an established cottage community with several local service providers, 2 churches, and several hotels. In 1896, the clubhouse for the Britannia Yacht Club was constructed, and the extension of the streetcars to Britannia and the opening of Britannia Park in 1900 facilitated Britannia becoming one of Ottawa's most popular summer resorts. Between 1900 and the advent of the First World War in 1914 is considered Britannia's golden period. Next slide, please. By the late 1890s and early 1900s, the vernacular cottage style was developed in Britannia. These features are rooted in late Victorian views of a healthy lifestyle by removing to the country and architecturally to have a transitional interior and exterior space. Britannia's typical early cottage was modest in size, around 1.5 stories in height, with a simple box or L-shaped form, horizontal lap or shingle siding, a prominent veranda with a front facade or wrapping around multiple facades, with ornamentation focused on the roof and veranda. Many of these features can be seen in the 7 residential properties staff are recommending for designation. Next slide, please. 119 Bradford Street was constructed around 1904 and is representative of Britannia's vernacular cottage. The first homeowners were Bessie L. Davidson and her husband Edmund Ebenezer Stockton. Mr. and Mrs. Stockton were early summer residents in Britannia since 1893 and year-round residents from 1896 onwards. E. Stockton was the clerk for the Auditor General's office and was highly involved during a lifetime member of the Britannia Yacht Club. He held several executive committee roles and judged the annual regattas. He also proposed the creation of the Regional War Canoe League in 1899, which prompted the establishment of the Canadian Canoe Association the following year. Next slide, please. The key attributes that contribute to the cultural heritage value of 119 Bradford Street as a representative example of Britannia's vernacular cottage include its simple rectangular form, two-story massing, front gable with wooden decorative roof elements, a red brick chimney, wood horizontal lap siding, and an open wooden wraparound veranda. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And next slide. Perfect. 205 Bradford Street was constructed around 1900 and is representative of the Queen Anne Revival style with Britannia's vernacular cottage influences. The first homeowner was W.F. Harmer, who made it their family home for several years. Then his daughter Marion and Gertrude owned the house until 1908. The next long-term homeowners were Maxwell H. Graham and his wife from 1913 to 1928. Maxwell joined Dominion Parks, which is known today as Parks Canada, a year after the National Park Service was established in 1912. He became chief and then head of the Wildlife Division in the Department of the Interior Branch and was responsible for all park animals in Western and Northern Canada. Mr. Graham was a pioneer bureaucrat in wildlife conservation and can be credited with preventing the extinction of big game in Alberta and Saskatchewan through the creation of 3 national parks. Next slide, please. The key attributes that contribute to the cultural heritage value of 205 Bradford Street as a representative example of the Queen Anne Revival style and Britannia vernacular cottage include its 1.5-story massing, asymmetrical complex cross gable roofline with multiple projections, horizontal siding, open wooden wraparound veranda, turret with conical roof and finial, ornamental millwork and gable apex panel, and a decorative bullseye window. 205 Bradford Street also has contextual value due to its proximity to 195 Bradford Street, the house immediately north, as both lots were developed by the Harmers. Next slide, please. 73 Britannia Road was constructed around 1912 and is representative of Britannia's vernacular cottage. It is likely around 1922 that the craftsman style influences, including the wide veranda, were added. The first homeowners were James Edmund Hodgins, a local Britannia carpenter, and his wife, Emma Murphy. Emma was the daughter of William Henry Murphy, who was an early year-round resident of Britannia who provided ice and cartage services. Emma lived most of her life in Britannia and was highly involved in local organizations and charities. Next slide, please. The key attributes that contribute to the cultural heritage value of 73 Britannia Road as a representative example of Britannia's vernacular cottage include its simple square form, 1.5-story massing, side gable roof with a central gable dormer, wood horizontal lap siding, and the craftsman style influences include its prominent wood veranda with decorative gable ornamentation providing a symmetrical facade, with thick columns, square capitals and bases, and slightly tapered cobblestone piers. Next slide, please. 95 Kirby Road was constructed around 1895 and is representative of Britannia's elaborated vernacular cottage and is representative and rare example of the shingle style in Ottawa. The cottage was built for Mrs. Harriet Isabel Wainwright and her family, who summered there until 1914. 95 Kirby Road was built by local carpenter Charles Robinson, who built and defined Britannia's elevated vernacular cottage, along with several other important buildings to the community, such as St. Stephen's Anglican Church and the Britannia Yacht Club. Next slide, please. Can you go back one, please? Sorry. Thanks. The key attributes that contribute to the cultural heritage value of 95 Kirby Road as a representative example of Britannia's vernacular cottage include its complex massing with multiple gables, open wooden wraparound veranda with simple wooden ornamentation, wood horizontal lap siding on the first story, decorative red brick chimneys, and its shingle style influences include cedar shingle cladding on the second story and a second story open porch clad in cedar shingles with decorative wood features. This property also has contextual value due to its proximity to 2775 Rowett Street, located immediately west, which was also built by Charles Robinson. Next slide, please. 2764 Rowett Street was likely constructed before 1873 and is thereby one of the earliest residences in Britannia. The building is representative of a late Victorian style with Queen Anne Revival and Italianate influences, and along with its Britannia vernacular cottage features. The first homeowner was John Cameron Jameson, who's considered the principal developer of Britannia. When the plan for Britannia was created in 1873, he purchased several blocks and lots, built and managed several apartments, and offered water services, thereby creating a summer resort. At least 3 generations of Jamesons lived at the house, including J.C. Jameson's son, Gerald, who continued his father's property business into the 1950s. Next slide, please. Key attributes that contribute to the cultural heritage value of 2764 Rowett Street as a representative example of late Victorian architecture with Queen Anne Revival and Italianate influences and Britannia's vernacular cottage include its T-shaped plan and cross-gabled roof, 2.5-story massing with red brick cladding and a stone foundation, open wooden wraparound verandas with decorative gable ends and ornate wooden fretwork, a prominent box bay window with pattern wood detailing, segmental arch window openings with lunettes, voussoirs, and stone lug sills, and stained glass transom windows and a decorative wooden front door. Next slide, please. 2775 Rowett Street was constructed around 1890 and is representative of Britannia's vernacular cottage. The first homeowners were Julia and Robert Burland. Robert was highly involved in the community, and he assisted with the opening of St. Stephen's Anglican Church in 1892 and supported the Britannia Yacht Club. The house was built by Charles Robinson, the same carpenter who built 95 Kirby Road across the street. Robinson also built local community buildings, which included renovating J.C. Jameson's former sawmill into apartments in the late 1890s. Next slide, please. The key attributes that contribute to the cultural heritage value of 2775 Rowett Street as a representative example of Britannia's vernacular cottage include its 2-story massing with a side gable roof, open wooden wraparound veranda with arched spandrels, open 2nd-story porch with cedar shingles, simple columns, and arched spandrels, and a decorative red brick chimney. The property also has contextual value due to its proximity to 95 Kirby Road, located immediately east, also built by Charles Robinson. Next slide, please. 2777 Castle Street is representative of a late 19th century recreational clubhouse in Ontario and is one of the few remaining examples in Ottawa. It is home to the Britannia Yacht Club, formerly known as the Britannia Aquatic Club, Britannia Nautical Club, and then the Britannia Boat Club House, since its construction in 1896. The club was created in 1887, and they met in J.C. Jameson's old sawmill until this building was constructed in 1896. The clubhouse was designed by prominent Ottawa architect Edgar Lewis Horwood, who was chief architect of public works from 1915 to 1919, and was built by local Britannia carpenter Charles Robinson. The clubhouse stimulated the growth of club membership and was an integral part of Britannia as a summer resort. The clubhouse also served as a community hub to Britannia and Ottawa residents alike since its construction to today. Next slide, please. The key attributes that contribute to the cultural heritage value of 2777 Castle Street as a representative example of late 19th century recreational clubhouse include its simple square-shaped footprint and 2.5-story massing, steeply pitched hip roof and hip dormers, wide wraparound veranda on the 2nd story, large windows, and it has Tudor Revival and Gothic Revival influences, which include the use of natural materials and a tower with the date 1887 engraved, which is the year the club was formed. Another key attribute is its picturesque setting along with its prominent location on the Britannia Peninsula with multiple views of the Ottawa River. Thank you for your time, and that concludes our presentation.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We did receive correspondence from the Britannia Village Community Association from a resident as well as Heritage Ottawa. And we do have 3 registered speakers. We're assuming that they are all in the room because we don't have those participants online. So the first registered speaker is Janet Durno. Thank you so much for appearing before us this morning, and you have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My house, 119 Bradford Street, is one of the houses in Britannia Village that are proposed for heritage designation. I do value the heritage nature of Britannia, and for many years have maintained my old house at considerable cost. But I am very concerned about the proposal to designate it, and I would like to request that the house not be designated. In my view, the house is becoming increasingly fragile. It was built as a cottage with little storage space, no basement or proper foundation, walls which have little or no insulation, and a very low crawl space, which often has to be entered for repairs and requires people to do the work lying down. As a result, few tradespeople will agree to go into that space. And when they do, the cost is very high. Despite preventative measures, rodent entry and damage has been increasing over the years. For example, a groundhog in the crawl space chewing wires and shorting out the entire electrical system. There are annual issues with wet and moldy insulation from leaks in the attics, again, in spite of preventative measures. The fireplace has been deemed unsafe and has been unusable for many years. As time goes by, I am concerned that more issues could arise, which could eventually render the house unsafe to live in, or at least make it even more prohibitively costly to maintain. I'm also concerned about the potential impact on my own future financial security, in particular, the impact on the resale value of the property. While the lot is large, the house itself is small, at this stage probably adequate for only 1 or 2 people to live in. If the house becomes a designated heritage property with all the restrictions that carries with it, I expect that this, combined with the small size and age of the house and the high ongoing maintenance costs, would significantly reduce the number of interested buyers and potentially decrease the resale value of my property. If so, this would have a negative impact on my future financial security. I therefore request that my house not be designated as a heritage property. Thank you for considering my request.
Thank you for your comments this morning. They're much appreciated. Are there any questions? And I see that Councillor Kavanaugh has raised her hand.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming out today. I appreciate it. I just wanted to find out if you've gotten any advice from our heritage staff regarding what can be done to modernize your house within the heritage designation.
I mean, I've certainly had very productive discussions with everyone involved in the heritage team, as well as your office as well, which I really appreciate. What I understand is that support is available to restore or maintain the actual aspects of the house that are mentioned as heritage attributes. But with my house, it's much more everything else. So I haven't actually discussed whether there would be support to, I don't know, put the house on a proper foundation or, I haven't discussed that sort of thing, no.
Is that what you're looking to do? I can ask questions to city staff for you on that point.
I mean, I would certainly be interested in knowing what was possible. At the moment, my only real intention is to continue maintaining the house as it is, for as long as I can stay in the house. I have no plans to do anything else with it. As long as I continue to be able to afford the maintenance costs. But, if there was support for stabilizing it a bit more or something, I'd be interested to know. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't check this and I apologize. Are you on the floodplain?
No.
You're not. Okay.
I'm on the island.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
I appreciate those questions from your ward councillor. Are there any other questions from committee? Seeing none, thank you so much for your delegation. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
The next registered speaker is Malcolm Campbell. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and
Thank
you
you.
have 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you very kindly. I live at 195 Bradford, which is just down the street from my friends at 119, and we do have a similar property. I've been away from Canada. I just got back on the 5th of April, Friday night, read my mail on Sunday, the 7th of April, and I'm a little overwhelmed right now. And so I'm a little, I'm just a little overwhelmed because it came very quickly. And so I'm sort of trying to digest this, and I was really fortunate to be able to reach out and talk to yourselves, and I got great support like very quickly. And sort of took the time, come off work and come down here and be able to at least speak to you. And at the time, my request was that my property would be removed from the application at this time. If this is like a cycle or something, then I'm saying if you could please pull it off at this time and then resubmit. And really what I need to do, and sort of all of my notes really go towards the idea that of all the properties in Britannia, I can't speak to 119 because it's actually the one that I didn't know very well, even though they're my neighbors. But all the other properties have really been sequentially restored and developed over many, many decades. And they have foundations and they have proper insulation, and the water doesn't freeze in the middle of winter, and you're not looking at rodents and things. My house, or the cottage really, as it is described as a cottage, sits on stacked field stones with timbers that are 126 years old. And truly, it really is dry rotting. And it's at a point where I just even don't know if it can come back. It's cute because I painted it. It's cute for about 4 months, and the rest of the time it's not so cute. So I just would like to request that if you could pull it right now, and then as Councillor Kavanaugh indicated, and like maybe there are structural engineering investigations and kind of getting into it and finding out what's really under the slick coat of paint. But I know the porch is it's mostly unrecoverable, and I think that I would need some professional help before so this is my request, is if you could just pull it off for now and give me a chance to breathe.
So we definitely appreciate that request. That's one of the reasons why we have this deferral of report recommendation to motion before us. That will look at the need for additional time for discussion around the designation of your property. So that is before us. Staff works hard to ensure that we work with property owners and that we have frank discussions in terms of goodwill with property owners before decisions are made. So I know in the past there's been some concerns around natural justice in terms of residents having proper representations before the committee, and as well as city staff. I can assure you that staff will definitely have those discussions with you and work with you. So that's the recommendation that's before us. And so that would result with the, if approved by this committee, with the removal of that recommendation so that staff will have more time to talk with you.
Okay.
Yeah. So are there any other questions for this delegation? Seeing none, thank you so much for your delegations, much appreciated. And the next registered speaker is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa. Thank you so much, and you can go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Designation of these 8 properties in Britannia Village, along with the 7 which were already designated more than 20 years ago, reflect the importance of this neighborhood as a significant component of Ottawa's built heritage. A statement of cultural heritage value for each property recognizes their historical and architectural importance and make a strong case for designation of each. We are pleased to note that the presence of, quote, old growth trees are an important aspect of the reasons for designation. It is, however, not clear if this term that usually describes trees that predate the lumbering area in the Ottawa Valley is what is meant, or whether they merely predate the buildings constructed in the neighborhood. Perhaps staff could clarify this. If these designations are approved, Britannia Village would likely be well on the way to meeting the threshold required for the establishment of a heritage conservation district under Part 5 of the Act. These designations could also be a prelude to a study of the interiors of some of these former 20th century cottages, as well as the Britannia Yacht Club. We support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments and submission. And I see that there is a question from Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your analysis of Britannia Village. We're all very proud of it, and it's a real jewel in our community for sure. What is the threshold number for number of properties? Is it a percentage or is it a number of properties?
I think it's 25%, but staff could correct me on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's 25% of the properties within a boundary have to meet 2 or more of the criteria prescribed under the Heritage Act.
Does that include like townhouses, et cetera, that may have been built?
Yeah, it would include, so that's part of the challenge, I think, for Britannia at this point.
Yeah.
Because that is something we have been talking about ourselves, but it would include any property within whatever boundary it is that you draw. So if you look at the historic sort of peninsula, let's say, of Britannia, I'm not sure it would meet that 25% at this point, which is part of the reason that we've recommended proceeding with these designations.
Yeah, no, that's what I was wondering. And unless you had it like to 2 streets or something along.
Exactly. And that, I mean, that's a possibility as well.
Okay. All right. No, I appreciate the expertise here. And thank you very much, Mr. Fleming, for all your work on this. I just wanted to get a sense of where it fits in, because this is the first time I've been to this committee, because we don't have much else that's heritage. We have a bit, some really interesting stuff. So, but thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you. We appreciate your delegations. And so now we can move to questions for staff. And I see that Councillor Troster has raised her hand.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if a staff could clarify why you're supporting a motion to pull one of the properties at this time and not the other one that a resident came to speak about.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the main reason at this point in time is that we haven't had an opportunity to have a fulsome discussion with the property owner of the property that we're recommending to defer. So as we committed back in June of last year, we did reach out to the property owner 6 weeks in advance, but due to being away, et cetera, we think it's appropriate to allow enough time to fully explain what designation means, what the options are, for us to make sure we have a strong understanding of the owner's concerns and then decide how to proceed.
Okay. And should there be a situation where, because I know this delegate came to speak about the fact that his house doesn't have a strong enough foundation compared to the other properties, would that be something that you take into account with your final decision in terms of designation?
I think it's an unusual situation, just given the nature of these houses in Britannia, that they were originally built as cottages. So it is something I think we need to have further discussion with the owner about and further consideration of. I mean, there are houses throughout Ottawa that are designated that don't have foundations. Much of the early building stock in Lower Town, for instance, doesn't have a basement. So it is something that we would look into. And I think, you know, we're not, you can't always be fully aware of issues around condition, et cetera, when you're looking at a building from the outside and you haven't had the opportunity to have a full discussion with the owner. So we just want everybody to go in with their eyes open.
Okay. And should the property become designated, and let's say later that property owner, a structural engineer comes in and says, look, this thing is going to fall down, like it is rotting from the inside. At that point, they could apply to demolish with your permission, even if designated?
With council's permission.
With council's permission, yes. your recommendation, council's permission. Okay,
Correct.
thank you. So just to be clear, you feel with every other property except for the one contained in this motion that you've had enough time to discuss with the property owners and you feel they're well informed?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Member Dote.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to understand that for an area to be in its CD, the 25% of the properties do not need to be Part 4 designations. Am I correct?
That is correct. We don't need any Part 4 designations.
Okay, so assuming that it does not meet the number of Part 4 designations, even after this designation does not really meet the threshold for 25%, this area could still be nominated as an HCD.
This area could potentially be studied as an HCD. I think at this point in time, without a full analysis, it's staff's preliminary opinion that this area would likely not meet that 25%, but we have not done that full analysis at this point in time.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a more of a technical difficulties. Oh, now we're back. I went through your research and the presentation, and it seems you've done quite a lot of in-depth research to substantiate the designation, which I think will go forward, with the exception of the additional time that perhaps wasn't given for the one property owner to be able to be briefed properly for what's to take place. So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you so much for those comments. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. 119 and 195 Bradford are on the Heritage Registry.
Yes, all these properties on the Heritage Register.
What are the 109 implications with respect to timelines moving forward?
It's the same with other properties that we're evaluating. By the end of this year, they would have to be designated or removed from the register.
And what are the consequences of having them removed from the register by the end of the year under Bill 109?
They'd be removed. There's no protection.
Are they not ineligible for relisting at some point?
Well, we would have to remove them before the end of the year. In the similar fashion that we're removing all of the other ones, like the report that's on the agenda today, we are removing them in advance of the end of the year in order to hopefully be able to relist if required. That's the strategic approach that we've taken to the properties listed on the register.
So if we chose not to designate these properties today, we would then have a further process to remove them from the registry to ensure that we're eligible at some future point to relist them.
Well, I think if council were to determine that these properties should not be designated, then we would likely just remove them from the register, and that would probably be it. Because if council doesn't want to designate, the register is no longer a tool that we can use to sort of monitor long-term. It gives us this kind of 2-year cycle going forward as of the beginning of next year.
Okay, and if they were removed from the register when the owner sold, we wouldn't be entitled to any notice with respect to a demolition?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all your work on these properties. They're all very special. One big difference between 119 and 195 Bradford is that 195 is on the floodplain. And I wanted to know how that affects heritage status because there's obviously restrictions. And even though the berm has been built, I haven't heard any official changes in terms of what is still considered to be the floodplain with the berm built. This is the Britannia berm wall that was built along the west side of that whole village.
Through you, Chair, while doing our analysis through the village, we noticed that many of these houses were built very low to the ground with little or foundations or no foundations. And we were considering including that as an attribute at the time, considering it sort of an iconic feature of many of the houses. However, knowing that the floodplain issues in the area, we decided to not include that as an attribute, therefore allowing opportunities to raise these houses if there is a need to do that structurally or just to preserve the houses.
So 195 could raise their property?
Yes, that's correct. If it was designated, an application will be required to permit that alteration, but something that staff could likely support.
Okay. All right. So, and in terms of other alterations for safety reasons or pest control, et cetera, what can be done? For example, in 119, there was a number of issues because of it not having a basement.
Any exterior changes required to mitigate pest control would be reviewed through a heritage permit process.
Okay, so it's possible to do, but you have to go through an extra step. Is that it?
If it was an exterior change such as to the eaves or soffits, porch flooring, we would do a heritage permit for that work. So one extra step through that process, and we would likely support something like that.
Okay, but all right, I'll just ask, since it's not on the floodplain, it could have a basement put in. Would that be allowed?
I think generally we try to work with all property owners of heritage properties to achieve their goals. So I think that's sort of the general principle that we go with when it's things like pest control and foundation issues and that sort of thing. These are fundamental issues that affect both the way in which a property owner enjoys and lives in their house, but also the heritage fabric of the building. And so it's in everybody's best interest to solve these problems. So if the owner wanted to put in a basement, I think that is something that, whether it's this owner or a future owner, that is something that staff would likely support.
Okay, thank you. And I'm talking hypothetically because I didn't check with the owner. I just,
of course,
I just wanted to know
what's possible,
the parameters. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for those questions. And I don't see any other hands raised. Just wanted to briefly say that I was really impressed with the depth and the breadth of this report as well, in terms of outlining the cultural attributes as well as the architectural attributes. And very impressed with the fact that we are now going to see thematic designations come before the committee. So thank you for the hard work. We appreciate it, and we appreciate the potential of the protection of these properties. I would concur with the ward councillor. Britannia Village is just a beautiful gem in the city and is worth exploration around designation. So really pleased to have seen this report come before us. Is the motion carried?
Yeah.
Is the motion as amended carried? Yeah. Thank you. So this report will be submitted to council on April 17th for consideration. Our next item revolves around the Office of the City Clerk, status updates, Built Heritage Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending March 22nd, 2024. There is no presentation. There was no correspondence. There are no speakers registered. This is a pro forma report. Are there any questions to staff? Seeing none, is the report received? Thank you. Received. There are no in-camera items. There is one item that is listed as information previously distributed report. And I just wanted to seek with the will of the committee lifting this report just for a brief presentation and some questions that I have. So, and it would be very brief, Councilor Leeper. So I just want to seek the will and the consent of committee to basically lift this item. So I think that I'm seeing consent to do that. So let's have a brief report on the tools to prevent deterioration of designated heritage properties.
Good morning again. Chair King is making me work hard on my first day back from vacation. So as was mentioned, this was an IPD prepared in response to
a direction received in March 2022 by former Councillor McKenney related to the deterioration of designated heritage properties. So the IPD was prepared by heritage staff in consultation with legal services staff. So Christine Enta is here as well if there are any questions of a legal nature. Next slide, please. So I guess the basic point is that the city cannot compel a property owner to initiate development of a property, whether it's designated or not. This is something that we have discussed at length over the past several years related to some specific properties. That being said, as this committee has heard through presentations on the Heritage Watch List and various applications that have been before the committee recently, we do have several tools that we use to encourage and require property owners to maintain their designated properties, whether they're vacant or not. So I'll give a brief overview of these tools today, and then I'm happy to answer any questions the committee might have. Next slide, please. So I've sort of put them into two buckets, the legal tools that we have available to us, as well as monitoring tools that we have available to us. So the first is the property standards bylaw. So this is the key tool that we use to require the maintenance of a heritage property to a minimum standard. So in 2013, a new section of the property standards bylaw was introduced related specifically to heritage properties, including a section on vacant heritage properties, which it has additional requirements. It requires that property owners maintain the heritage attributes of the property, and that if they require replacement, that they have to be replaced in kind. And so this is just sort of the basics of heritage conservation. And we work with our colleagues in bylaw and regulatory services to issue orders as required related to designated properties that require maintenance. Next slide, please. The Building Code Act also can help us in scenarios of serious disrepair or public safety issues. So some members of this committee may remember McGee House on Wellington Street West. I think Councillor Leeper definitely remembers it. It's a good example. Well, it's a good example of how the Building Code Act can be used to stabilize a designated heritage property and ensure public safety. So we can require, and when I say we, I'm speaking of the Royal City we, not we, me. These orders can require stabilization, repair, or the provision of professional reports, such as a structural engineer's report by an engineer specializing in heritage conservation. And we work very closely with our colleagues in building code services, including the chief building official in these instances. Next slide, please. And then we have monitoring tools. So I think this committee is well aware of the Heritage Watch List, which was created in 2016 to monitor designated properties that are vacant or at risk due to significant deterioration. We work closely with our colleagues in bylaw and regulatory services on the implementation of this list, as well as our colleagues in building code services. So we have proactive inspections of all properties on this list on a biannual basis. We may issue orders for boarding up, graffiti removal, repair, things like long grass and weeds, removal of debris, restoration, or other maintenance that's required. And this list includes vacant and occupied buildings that are at risk, but primarily vacant buildings. It would have to be very high risk to be on the watch list and be occupied. Next slide, please. And then we also have the community liaison program. So this provides a single point of contact in the heritage planning branch for community associations that have heritage conservation districts. So a member of my team is assigned to each community association where there are HCDs, and we work with the community association who may submit inquiries or concerns about vacant or deteriorating buildings within their heritage conservation district. And we collaborate with them to help us identify heritage properties that are at risk. We don't have the capacity internally to go out and visit all 4,000 plus designated properties on a regular basis to inspect their attributes, et cetera. So we do rely on our community partners to assist us in identifying areas where there are concerns. Next slide, please. And then committee members and council members will be aware of other tools that are more broadly applied, not just to heritage properties, but the vacant unit tax and the vacant property permit program that help to encourage owners to not leave their properties vacant. Next slide. And so in conclusion,
I think what I would say is that all of these tools from a heritage perspective have been developed over the last 10 years or so. We have bolstered our efforts to address demolition by neglect for heritage properties. I think as this committee has seen, we're not always successful. But that being said, I think many of the files that this committee has seen over the last several months where we are dealing with issues of demolition by neglect are things that have been going on for 15, 20 plus years before we had these tools in our toolbox. And so the goal here is that going forward, we're collaborating internally and with our community partners to try to prevent new examples of demolition by neglect in the city. So they don't become properties that are vacant today, don't become those problematic properties that we have seen in front of this committee in the last few months. That's everything for me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
We thank you for those questions. And now we have some questions for you, Councillor Troster.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure we can all imagine which property led Councillor McKenney to put this inquiry forward. A property which is now getting closer to actual redevelopment. So, you know, perhaps some of those tools actually worked. But I do have another property that's taking up an entire valuable downtown city block, which I'm sure you can also imagine on Gilmore Street. That's been sitting empty for almost 10 years. And the community association has done all these wonderful brainstorming sessions about what it could be. And my reply is, I'm sorry, you got to talk to the guy who owns it. Look, all that vision is wonderful. And the individual who owns the building in question has told me that he's content to sit on it for another 10 to 15 years and let it rot. So that he does not need to meet city heritage requirements. He's been extremely explicit multiple times. So I want to thank you and thank previous councils for bringing other tools forward, but it's a constant source of frustration that we don't have better options because we have quite a few buildings in Ward 14 that are clearly being demolished through neglect. The question I wanted to ask you is, I know that council was, or certainly Councillor McKenney was super close to considering expropriation of Somerset House and then decided not to do it. I'm just wondering, because the community asks me about expropriation all the time. Could you clarify under what conditions you would consider expropriating a problem property?
I'm going to refer this one to Ms. Enta.
Chair, legal services does not typically recommend expropriation of a private property. I don't know that it has ever been contemplated in the way in which we could utilize that instrument under the Expropriations Act in order to be able to give you a fulsome answer on this particular property. I would need to take it away today. But in the past, this question has arose and expropriation was not seen as a viable tool within our arsenal with respect to those properties in the past.
Okay, well, that's helpful. And maybe we need to have a future conversation about sharpening or strengthening our expropriation requirement, although it's a very expensive undertaking for the city, and city has to want to actually do something with the building instead of just, you know, purchasing something that could be a money pit with no clear civic use. But anyway, I want to thank Heritage staff for this presentation and for the tools we do have now. I'm hoping that they're creating some incentives for some of these property owners to move and actually do something. But I hate seeing entire city blocks go to rot because the property owner refuses to develop. It's really frustrating.
Thank you. Member Quinn.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in reference to a specific property as well. In fact, another property owned by the same person who owns the Gilmore Street property, and that would be the former Sisters of Visitation Convent on Richmond Road. Now, in this instance, the owner was given preferential treatment in order to develop the buildings on the site as the larger site plan approval process moved forward, with the understanding that there would be investment and development of the historic property. So I'm just wondering what power the city has when you have created a special situation like that as part of the longer term development process. What power does the city have to actually enforce those those understandings and those commitments that the owner at the time had made in order to get what he needed to go forward with the new development? So do you know what I'm talking about?
Chair,
Go ahead.
Chair, the details of any agreement that the city would enter into with a private owner would have to be reviewed in the context of those agreements and looked at in terms of moving forward on non-compliance and any considerations that were then written into those agreements by which we would need to enforce them, likely in Superior Court or in front of an arbitration panel, depending on what the agreement states.
Right. And the appetite to do something like that is limited by what?
Legal services would take directions from City Council with respect to enforcement of those agreements.
Okay, because I was a member of the Built Heritage Subcommittee at the time when all of that went down. And so I would personally be very interested to know why the owner has not been held accountable, considering all the new development is in place and underway, but the historic property is still boarded up and deteriorating with every passing day. So what would the community need to do, or what are the next steps to move something like that forward?
Chair, legal services would need to review those specific agreements and determine whether compliance or non-compliance has occurred in this situation, and then bring forward recommendations to City Council or to the Municipal Heritage Committee at that point.
Okay, thank you, Christina. And so and as you mentioned before, and just to be clear, that directive to you would need to come from council.
Chair, legal services would bring forward recommendations on what can be done in terms of non-compliance, depending on a review of those agreements.
Okay.
Okay.
Not quite answered, but okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. And Carolyn, I'd be interested in chatting with you about what you're thinking there. Obviously, the developer has in 2018 new zoning. They were pursuing site plan agreement in order to redevelop the convent property at the Salle de la Visitation. But I assume that they are facing the same headwinds that every developer is across the city right now. And so we're very frustrated waiting for them to get a shovel in the ground. The critical path to saving that convent is not continued visits from our heritage staff and orders. It is to move ahead with the approved development. And so I'm very keen that they do so. Obviously, they are facing the same conditions that everyone else is. But my question particularly is, I just wanted to come back to the expropriation question, because this is also something that people ask me. The expropriations proceed under, I believe, the Expropriations Act, which is a piece of provincial legislation.
That is correct, Chair.
Okay. And what are the circumstances in which the provincial statute allows the city to compel a sale from a private owner?
Chair, it is very difficult to move forward with the municipality's power under the Expropriations Act. You've indicated expense, of course, but it also the end result would typically have to be for a municipal purpose. And therefore, that can be an issue in terms of looking at the end result of any private property acquisition.
So in theory, we could determine through a master plan that a particular property needs to become a recreation center, which is a municipal purpose, then we would be compelled to pay fair market value, with the court being the ultimate arbiter of whether or not or what that fair market value is. Then we would have to demonstrate that we actually have the funding to build the recreation center, and then build it and operate it.
So
Is
there
that sort of the path?
So Chair, there is a process outlined under the Expropriations Act with respect to appraisal of the appropriate value. There are other costs that look into that appraisal, including any contingency costs for reports and documentation that's needed to support certain appraisal. There's the ability for the owner to come back and counter such appraisal, and the final determination on an expropriation is in front of the Ontario Land Tribunal.
Yep. I mean, it's not a path that is viable. And then I think, residents have to understand, or I think residents would resent paying recalcitrant landowners fair market value for their land. In many cases, those owners are sitting on properties that they acquired, years and years ago. They've seen significant appreciation in the value of that land, and the expropriation, if it were a recalcitrant owner who is being forced to sell, the compensation that they would get would be fair market value. The developer would get their money back and more. I'm having difficulties. I know we hear it over and over again, but I want to emphasize the degree to which there are so many downsides to expropriation. If a court were even to determine that an expropriation in order to accomplish a municipal purpose was even evident in a particular process. So I caution against looking to expropriation as a tool to solve these. I'll leave it there. Sorry, Christine, did you want to jump in with one more?
Chair, Mr. Curry has reminded me that both Legal Services and his department have circulated a number of memos in the past that detail our recommendations on expropriation, including all of the additional expenses and protocols that have to be followed, such as a hearing of necessity, as to, whether or not this is the last resort for a municipality to achieve its ends. And we can recirculate those, Chair, if you would like, to the committee for information.
Hearing of necessity was the language I was looking for. We have to demonstrate that there is a valid need for it. We can build recreation centers in lots of different places. It's unlikely that we are ever going to be able to demonstrate such a compelling municipal need for a particular piece of property that isn't associated with building an LRT system, any number of valid and legitimate municipal purposes. So, I know though that we will continue to hear from residents expropriate it, but maybe we can point them to this YouTube the next time we hear it. Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate the questions and the comments, and would definitely appreciate staff recirculating those memos around the Expropriation Act, noting that we do have also not so new, but we have newer members around the council table as well who probably appreciate that information. Vice Chair Plante.
Yes, thank you so much. So I think Heritage, or people may have seen that we had that motion on problematic properties at Emergency Services 3 weeks ago. I'm happy to sit with you and have a chat as to sort of the heritage tentacle as well. I know there's different laws and regulations around heritage property, so I'm happy to include that as part of the consultation we'll be doing in the next couple of weeks. Always happy to sit and chat about this topic because it's important that we preserve our heritage properties, but it's also important that homeowners don't use them as what Councillor Leeper, these like investment tools that they don't take care of. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that comment. And I had just a few questions as well to staff. So noting that several homes were lost due to years of neglect before many of these tools were put into place, Are staff satisfied with our current level of monitoring to help protect the remaining homes on the heritage watch list?
Through you, Chair, it's a little difficult to tell at this point because we have been continually bolstering these over the last few years. I think we do have a pretty rigorous system in place at this point in time. I don't have any specific suggestions of how we might further bolster that right now. I think one issue might be that sort of the property standards process can be a little lengthy. But that's more of a courts issue than a city staff issue. So I think the proof will be in a few years. It's hard to tell at this point in time.
Okay, and to ask about the resourcing, because you had said it might not be a staff issue. In your opinion, is there a set number of bylaw officers who are working just to monitor the property standards bylaw with specific knowledge concerning heritage properties? And are there enough of them?
Unfortunately, I think that's a question for my colleagues in bylaw and regulatory services to answer. And they are not here with us today. So we can take that back to them and report back if you like.
Yeah, I would appreciate that because I think the resourcing, looking at whether we have the appropriate numbers of resources around bylaw enforcement is very important. I know that when I'm discussing the issue with residents within heritage conservation districts or community associations, there has been some concern about the amount of resourcing. And so I wouldn't mind taking that offline and having a little bit more of a discussion around that. And I know that the mechanisms outline a heritage liaison who works with the community to flag concerns. I'm just wondering how that is working out.
From a staff perspective, we found it to be very helpful because these are the people who are in the community every day and, are out walking their dog or doing whatever and having a point of contact that they can send an email to, whether it's Ashley or Greg or myself or whoever, and say, I was out today and this person appears to be doing work and do they have a permit? It helps us also do some public education because there are genuine instances where property owners, for instance, undertake work on a heritage building with the intent of improving it and that sort of thing without realizing that they need a heritage permit. And so that allows us to then reach out to the owner and have a conversation and start that discussion, not in an adversarial way, but in a way of public education and working with them to ensure that the building is protected and maintained appropriately. So I think it's been a very helpful, it's not sort of a very formal tool. It relies on the relationships that city staff build with the community associations that we work with regularly. But it has been working fairly well.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate the suite of tools that have been coming online as well as enhanced penalties around issues, especially to address demolition by neglect. I think we're seeing a lot of concern in communities about this, and it's important to acknowledge that this has been obviously a long-standing historical problem in the city, but that the city is working hard, whether it's council, whether it's staff, to really start to assemble the tools to start to address these challenges. Of course, it takes time, and we acknowledge that. But in the interim, of course, what we're trying to guard against is properties falling down based on neglect. So I think it's important to emphasize the tools. I think that this has been a very useful discussion and exercise just to really outline to the public that city staff and council are dedicated to really addressing this challenge and are working to put the tools in place. I see that there might be one last question from Member Quinn.
Thank you, Chair. It's just picking up on a point that you raised, and we talked about this at a recent meeting when we had the report, when staff gave an excellent report on the status of the watch list. And I believe it was you, Councillor King, who suggested as a possibility that we, as a body, receive an update report more than once a year. And I'm just wondering if that has gone into the hopper at all, and is that something that could be that staff could take on maybe quarterly?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we are at the committee's will. I will tell you that on many of these properties, things don't change that quickly. So I'm not sure there's enough to say to give a quarterly report, to be honest with you. If I was going to suggest increased frequency, it would be at the most, I think, twice a year.
Okay.
But it's up to the committee. We haven't made any plans because at this point, those updates have kind of been at the chair's request at this point in time. So.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to formalize that so that they are it becomes a standard, because I think it also it keeps it's a reminder, knowing that a report is coming along, that those particularly difficult properties that bylaw officers are getting to them, so that they're the updated report has the latest. So I appreciate your recommendation of it being twice a year as opposed to quarterly, but I would like to see it myself more than once a year. I don't know.
And I would agree with you, Member Quinn, and staff in my office will work with Heritage staff to potentially bring forward a notice of motion in the future that might outline that schedule. So it's definitely on the drawing board based on the direction that we heard from committee. So appreciate those comments and that follow up, and we definitely will work on that. I don't see any other questions on the IPD, so I really just want to thank staff for their work on that item and for all the questions and good discussion that we had on that item. The next item is notices of motion, and I don't see any inquiries. No new inquiries. Under other business, there was a planning circulation that was filed regarding zoning bylaw amendment for 315 Chapel Street and a portion of 321 Chapel Street and 8 Blackburn Avenue. Is there any other business? Seeing none, on adjournment. Are we adjourned? We're adjourned. Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair. Bye all.